Over the last few weeks, I've been watching this developing El Nino like a hawk, and what I have noticed is the water temperatures there are surging at a rate that we have not seen before, and that parameter, at least according to what we saw a few weeks ago, was only expected to continue and potentially reach near record-breaking levels. However, as I've combed deeper and deeper into the data, there are some things there that have definitely changed my perspective on that. For starters, the majority of the models after the next 6 weeks actually have the warming trend starting to slow down, and in some models considerably. Before, we were looking at maybe averages of around 4 to 5 degrees Celsius in certain regions of the El Nino. Now we're considerably lower than that. But that's not even the biggest twist I have seen. The biggest twist I have seen is what is going to be happening in the months to come. Starting in early 2027, we are going to be seeing likely a much more violent swing back from El Nino down to potentially a La Nina going into June, July, and August. And in this video, we're going to break down all the details and the data we have gathered to break down what this Super El Nino is going to do. Alright, let's dive right into it. So, here's the situation that we have going into mid-July. This El Nino is continuing to get stronger. We're seeing near off-the-chart anomalies in regions 1 and 2 especially. However, over the next 6 weeks, things are going to start changing that is potentially going to be slowing down this El Nino, and especially over the next few months, that might be playing a role into what's going to be happening for next year, as we are looking at a potentially violent swing from El Nino to La Nina. So with that being said, let's go ahead and dive right into it. So starting off, here is our anomalies right here. This is for the entire ENSO region going on. Looking at off the coast of South America, ladies and gentlemen, you're looking at water temperatures exceeding almost 6 degrees Celsius above average in just the anomalies. That's about 10.8 degrees Fahrenheit for those of you who do not use the metric system. So think of the water temperature there on average is about 68 degrees Fahrenheit. The new water temperature measurements that are right now based on this anomaly would be about 79 degrees, almost 79 degrees Fahrenheit. That right there, at least off the coast of Ecuador and Peru, would be very detrimental to a lot of the environment over there. Coral reefs that are not used to those water temperatures, same thing with fish species. I know during El Ninos, fish tend to end up dead on the coast of South America in particular, so that's definitely an interesting situation to look at. And those water temperature anomalies are only going to get worse and worse as more of that warm water and those warm anomalies that are currently below the surface are only expected to upwell further and further as we get closer towards August. But ladies and gentlemen, this is a whole region-wide phenomenon that's going on from off the coast of South America to all the way near Indonesia and Australia over here. So it's definitely something that we're going to need to watch, and it's definitely something that we're paying attention to, especially as we look at our regions individually. Here is regions 1 and 2. This is the region that is off the coast of South America. This is closer to South America than region 3 and 4 is. Let me go ahead and move my camera over real quickly just to show you what we're looking at, ladies and gentlemen. But this is what we got for right here, and this is what we have. We are looking at our anomalies approaching 3.5 degrees Celsius above average across an entire synoptic region. That is about 6.3 degrees Fahrenheit for those of you who do not use the metric system. But looking at the trend we've seen over the last, especially 90 days, we were in relatively strong El Nino territory, then it started to cool down. We actually had our water temperatures cut down by nearly half, according to what we've seen with the ENSO graph. Still pretty considerably in El Nino territory, but we went from 2 degrees Celsius to almost 1 degree Celsius above average over here, and then it started to heat up rather gradually, getting up to 1.5, cooling down, and then starting to continue to move up and up and up, reaching the 2.5 degree threshold by the time we got to late May, and then we started really heating up to around our 3 degrees Celsius areas. It kind of slowed down for a little bit, then it went up again, but as of right now, with the exception of this tiny jump right here, things, at least in terms of what's going on with our anomalies in this region have interestingly started to slow down a little bit. We've been looking at it, we've been talking about it. There's been a lot of people that have been saying that we're looking at this is only accelerating. It appears to me that at least in this synoptic region, things have actually started to slow down over the course of the last few weeks, and that's definitely an interesting tidbit going forward, especially as we check regions 3 and 4. And what we got going on right here, definitely not nearly as big of a jump as what we saw with regions 1 and 2. You're still looking at over 2 degrees Celsius above average in this region, which is further along in the western part of the ENSO region. But ladies and gentlemen, we went from around positive neutral territory to El Nino territory in the span of 2 weeks. It definitely started to slow down a little bit, but it just kept picking up more and more and more. And by the time we got to around June, it really started heating up, although it has kind of started to slow down a little bit in terms of its development and in terms of how fast it was warming. That was until the early parts of July, when those water temperatures really started warming up once again. And we are now at a point where by the time we got to around first to second week of July over here, we're over 2 degrees Celsius above average, which that's, in my opinion, bearing super El Nino territory already. So if you average these two out, you're looking at water temperature anomaly, I'd say around 2.5, 2.6, maybe 2.7 degrees Celsius above average, which already is a very substantial amount of warming, and that is, at least for how early it is in the season, record-breaking in terms of the water temperature anomalies. But this doesn't show the full picture, and there's definitely some interesting things that we're going to want to also take a look at. For starters, here's what we got for you guys. This is just north of the ENSO region that we're paying attention to. It's not just the ENSO region that are seeing these record-breaking water temperatures. It's in a lot of areas around the world. In fact, the East Pacific, for example, you're looking at these water temperatures. They are, by a pretty significant long shot, they're pretty significantly in the above average territory. This is the climatological mean, this dashed line right here. And what we're looking at in terms of our water temperature anomalies, this is, I'd say, a good 2 degrees Celsius above average. So it's not just your El Nino region or your ENSO region that are seeing this. It's encompassing parts of the Atlantic. It's encompassing parts of the Eastern Pacific as well. So just a quick tidbit I wanted to mention as well before we get into some more interesting aspects of this. And just to kind of show you how crazy this is where our region 3 and 4 is in terms of our standard deviation. What's standard deviation? Think about your average, but add, I'd say, 0.5 degrees above or below that average right there, just to kind of give it that standard deviation, because that's around your positive to negative neutral phase right there. But here's what we have going on right here. You're looking at your standard deviation. This is almost 4 times above the standard deviation, according to what we've seen in just regions 3 and 4. That's the area that is eclipsing 2 degrees Celsius above average, ladies and gentlemen. What you're seeing with this is just, especially over the last 6 weeks, that standard deviation in these water temperatures in general have really surged across much of the ENSO region. And if you looked at this from the face value, you'd be going, okay, this is interesting. This is most likely a trend that's going to continue. But hold on a second, because there's a couple things we need to note. Here's the first thing right here, folks. First thing that we're looking at, here are our models. These are our models for our El Nino region right here. And from what we've seen, with the exception of the CMCC, they actually have it starting to slow down after the next 6 weeks right here. It's still going to reach potentially historic territory regardless, but it appears to me that at least the forecasts have definitely shifted. Before, we were thinking that there were going to be anomalies at, say, 4 or 5 degrees Celsius above average, and not just in one of the regions, but potentially across the entire ENSO region right there, which would definitely make it a super historic El Nino by any means. But the latest guidance that I have seen definitely puts a little bit of a pin in that balloon. And what I mean by that is, yeah, you're still going to see a potentially historic thing, but it's not going to be as historic as what I think a lot of people were originally forecasting for. And taking a look at it, let's go ahead and show you the euro. Before, the euro was leading the charge with how powerful this El Nino was going to be. Now it's down to about 3.9 degrees Celsius above average. Still not a small number by any stretch of the imagination, folks. but compared to what we saw previously and compared to what we're seeing now, it's definitely a lot lower than what especially the CMCC is showing. And another thing we're noticing, and it's also a trend with a lot of these ensembles and a lot of these models too, is it starts to slow down after we get towards mid to late August, and it starts to stall out, and the warming trend becomes more gradual. It goes from a rather rapid swing in the El Nino to a bit more of a gradual swing. This is pretty typical as we get past the summer. It's a sign that El Nino is starting to slow down, and it starts to reach its ultimate peak by the time we get to around December, January time in the year. But overall, the fact that we're seeing this shift and the fact that we're seeing this complete slowdown a lot earlier than I think a lot of people were forecasting, especially from a lot of news outlets and some of the articles that I've read, it's definitely an interesting take and an interesting change, especially going into December. Looking at the JMA, it's a similar situation, going up and then gradually slowing down. The ECCC2, it ramps up for the next month or so, and then it just stalls out around 3.8 degrees Celsius and actually starts to cool down a little bit in December. That's kind of what we were looking at also on the Triple P show. We were looking at seeing a peak around between October and December of 2026 before starting to weaken and fall back down to Earth. The BOM, we're about 2.4 degrees Celsius, goes up to about 3.6 after slowing down after the first month. Then we're looking at the NSEP right here, similar situation, gradual slowdown and actually cools down a little bit. French model that we're seeing as well, we're looking at 2 degrees Celsius. Overall, what I'm noticing with this is kind of a deviation of about 1.5 times above its current water temperature anomaly that we have now is what's going to be forecasted to be the peak. That's an overall trend that I've noticed, at least for the most part. The WD is definitely an exception to that rule. It's around 2.4, but it's expected to stall out after the next couple of weeks, cool down some, and then warm up some to about 3 degrees Celsius. I don't know how realistic that would be, and you'd have to have some pretty significant upwelling of cooler waters, especially in the western region, for that to take place. But I haven't really seen too much of that happening just yet, although we're going to have to pay attention to that and keep that in mind. And then with the ECCC1, you definitely are looking at 1.7. It stalls out for the fall, and then it starts to surge back up in the winter time, which is definitely a possibility, but we're going to want to watch out for that. And then the UK Met has it peaking actually around October time before slowing down and starting to stagnate and decrease to about 2.7 degrees Celsius above average by the time we get to December. So looking at this chart right here is definitely interesting. Before, a lot of models were thinking, okay, this is going to be pretty significant, especially in regions 3 and 4, where you're looking at your anomalies over 4.5, maybe 5 degrees Celsius above average by December time. The answer to that and the reality to that is a lot more complex, because you still have to deal with some sort of upwelling, you still have to deal with how things are going to pan out. Yes, you're seeing these ridiculous anomalies right now, but the main question is, how long are these going to last, and how much are these going to hold? And we actually have some in-depth analysis to go over that we can show you why that may not be as strong and why this El Nino may not last as long as I think a lot of people will suspect. So pulling this up, this is the Armor 3D subsurface temperature anomalies. This right region right here is what you're seeing with your El Nino, folks. This huge region of above average anomalies, especially around 100 meters below the surface, is why you're seeing this big super El Nino pop up, because these warmer waters are expected to continue to move up and up and up as more upwelling occurs across the ENSO region. You're seeing more shear in the region as well, which is also going to help with that upwelling and really ramp up those water temperature anomalies. So it's definitely an intriguing situation that you're going to want to pay attention to. Looking at the 20-degree isotherm, it's definitely considerably below the climatological mean, which is this dashed line right here, until you get about to 180 degrees longitudinally. There, the pattern starts to shift quite a bit into a much more cooler average compared to what we've seen, especially off the coast of Papua New Guinea, Indonesia, and other areas in the Pacific. This right here is what you're going to want to watch out for in the long term, because short term, yes, you're going to see these upwelling and potentially spreading across much of the ENSO region going into August, September, and October. But after October, what we've started to notice is a lot of these anomalies do not reach below 200 meters below the sea level, and you're starting to see these colder anomalies really starting to creep in, especially in the western parts of the ENSO region. And as time continues to progress, based on what I've seen, these cold anomalies are only going to shift further and further to the east and get stronger throughout the summer and the autumn. And by the time we get to potentially December and January, a lot of these cold anomalies are going to be below parts of the El Nino right here. Heck, we're already starting to see that a little bit right off the coast of Peru, although it's in just a small area, so you can't really put too much stock into that. But by and large, things are definitely getting interesting as things will start shifting further to the east. This right here is what is going to trigger our violent swing. And based on what I've seen, it's definitely moving further to the east and strengthening, at least according to when I've talked to with some of the guys I know, like Logan Rounds, as well as a few other people I have talked to and a few other sources I have dove into with this. This is actually cooling below the surface at a much faster rate than a lot of people have expected. And this is part of the reason why I think that this is going to be, at least this El Nino is going to be a powerhouse, but it's not going to last as long as I think a lot of people and a lot of news outlets are forecasting. They're not looking at the in-depth analysis that we're seeing. Yes, you're seeing still warm averages well below the thermocline, well below the time we get to about 400 meters right here, but those are only decaying and those are only decreasing as time continues to progress, because a lot of the bulky water temperature anomalies are well above, and they're mainly concentrated around 100 to 150 meters. So overall, what I'm trying to point out here is after this huge amount of water temperature anomalies move closer and closer and eventually surface, there's not really going to be much following behind it. And when that happens, you're going to have your cooler waters starting to move into this region, and you're going to start seeing a potential shift from El Nino to La Nina. And especially considering how warm these anomalies are and how warm the waters are right now in the ENSO region, you're going to have a situation where if we're seeing much stronger cooling than expected, we could have a scenario where we actually have a pretty violent swing from maybe super El Nino down to La Nina throughout the first few months of 2027. And based on the latest guidance that I've seen, I would not be surprised if that starts right after the new year. I'd say the earliest it would start shifting is probably December 2026 into January 2027. I'd say those 2 months, especially from what I've seen with other people forecasting, maybe it not happening till February, March, even as late as April. I wouldn't be surprised given what's going on right here, given that the powerhouse that we have is kind of top heavy, and it's only growing more top heavy by the day, where you have a scenario where instead of this just persisting for a few months, it actually ramps up, then it starts to cool down pretty dramatically after the fact. In fact, the CANSIPs, I know we talked about this last time, but we'll also show you this once again, just to kind of give you an idea of what we're looking at. The CANSIPs illustrates this perfectly, in my opinion, and we'll go ahead and show you that. So here is the CANSIPs, and this is by the time we get to October 2026. Here is when the ENSO region in the El Nino is arguably at its absolute warmest, according to the CANSIPS model. Looking at all of this right here, you're looking at your stronger anomalies much further to the west than they are right now. That's when that upwelling process is going to be at its zenith across much of this region. Definitely something that you're going to want to pay attention to. But overall, by the time we get to November, regions 1 and 2 here start cooling down and stagnating. The ENSO region, the very high anomalies right here, really start stagnating as well. In December, it becomes a lot more obvious as well, as this starts to retreat further and further to the west. And the cooling process begins around off the coast of Ecuador, off the coast of Peru over here, and especially around the Galapagos Islands. And then as we get into January, it starts really stagnating and really cooling down, especially in this region, regions 3 and 4 right here. And then as we get to February, things really start cooling down in regions 1 and 2. Same thing with March and then April. This is a pretty considerable shift from March to April right here, folks, because you're already seeing this process starting around, I'd say, November to December. And then by the time we get to March is when you're seeing a weakened El Nino across much of this region. From April to May, it just completely crashes. We go from a positive El Nino to potentially a neutral phase in the span of about 30 days. So that is a pretty significant drop in terms of your region right here in terms of your temperatures. And then as we go into June, you're starting to see your ENSO region and really peaking from El Nino to potentially negative neutral to La Nina. So that's what we're looking at right here, and that's the overall gist of this. And ultimately, from what I've seen, especially with the latest analysis and with the more models that I've been able to comb through, is this is not going to be a situation where this El Nino just slowly dies off. This is going to be, and it kind of reinforced to me today looking at all this data, is this is going to be a rather very violent swing from El Nino to La Nina. And the models that I've seen definitely are showing signs of that a lot earlier than anticipated. Kind of that process, instead of starting maybe January and February, maybe starting in November or December. And the reason I'm saying that is because by the time we reach the absolute peak around October, according to a lot of these models, by that point the warming across much of the ENSO region has started to slow down, it's stagnated, and it kind of remains in that level. And in a lot of models that actually starts cooling down after that point in terms of your anomalies. And then as we get to January and February, from what I've seen here, it starts to stagnate, not just in one of the regions, but everywhere, where you start seeing those cooling water temperatures, especially as that upwelling starts to ramp up, and especially as those cooler anomalies move further and further and further to the east. So overall, my main takeaways are this. Number one, the ENSO region is most likely going to start be peaking around October of 2026 instead of November or December 2026. We're looking at a potentially earlier peak than anticipated. Number two, the models that I have seen are not showing the significant El Nino that a lot of news outlets are showing. Yes, it's still going to be very significant. It's still going to be super El Nino territory, but we're not seeing 4 to 5 degrees Celsius anomalies across the entire ENSO region. We're looking at maybe around 3 to 3.5. It's kind of what I talked about in the last El Nino video, but I wanted to reinforce that. And also another trend I've noticed is that after we get to October, it kind of just stalls out or decreases by a slight amount going into November and December, which kind of segues into my next takeaway, is the transition from El Nino to potentially La Nina, in my opinion, is going to start earlier than expected. Instead of maybe January, February, March of next year, maybe it starts, in my opinion, in November or December of 2026, based on the fact that you have cooler anomalies going on already across parts of the ENSO region, already below parts of the ENSO region, and those are only going to carry further and further to the east. And those cooler anomalies are actually moving further to the east and cooling down at a faster rate than a lot of people are expecting and a lot of people are thinking about right now. That's kind of part of the reason why I think it triggers a lot earlier. You're also seeing much more upwelling, as you're seeing more shear, especially in the next couple of weeks across parts of the ENSO region. That's going to drive up those water temperatures and those very warm water temperatures just below the surface up to the surface much quicker than I think a lot of people are thinking. I'm thinking those will really start popping up by the time we get to early to mid-August, based on what I've seen. And it wouldn't necessarily surprise me if it was around that time frame, but what will be interesting is what those cool anomalies will be doing below that massive heat anomaly, because what that will do is it'll not only just make this whole El Nino and this whole ENSO region much more top heavy, but it's also going to be a signal to me especially that, hey, this may be good right now, this may be a strong El Nino right now, but this is going to undergo one of the most violent collapses in ENSO region recorded history. And that's kind of what I'm aiming for right here. That's kind of my main takeaway, that I would say this El Nino, as impressive as it's going to be, is not going to last very long. And ultimately, yes, you're going to see pretty significant weather changes, but you're arguably going to be seeing even more weather changes when this shift goes from El Nino to potentially a La Nina by the end of next year. So those are all things that we're going to want to pay attention to, and those are all things we'll continue to keep you updated on here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel. But with that being said, we're going to go ahead and close the video out right here. I really hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are new. The goal, as always, is to get more people engaged with weather. If you'd like to help out, hang out, ask us questions, feel free to join the Storms United Discord server. The link to that is in the end screen. And with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.